again, I'll circle back around to who I am. My name is Clay Travis. I do a radio show 6 to 9 a.m. On Fox Sports Radio. I run a website for the past 6 years called Outkick the Coverage. And what I was initially going to talk about is kind of how social media has changed the gambling industry, but also just the sports arena space in general. And I'll stand up so everybody can see maybe a little bit easier. I started writing. I came into the world of doing what we do now in 2004. I was writing just articles on the internet. I went to law school, moved to the Caribbean, lived in St. Thomas, and I was like, I had a quarter-life crisis. Like a lot of you probably out there watching right now, you're sitting around and you're 25 years old and you got a job and you're like, holy fuck, is this really what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life? And I feel like it used to be midlife crisis. I think now it's kind of moved up a little bit, 24, 25, 26. So I'm 25 years old and I'm sitting in my office and I think I do not want to be the kind of lawyer that I am right now. So I started writing online. And I started writing online for an audience of 0 in 2004. Ideally writing smart, funny, original columns that would entertain people like me who were sitting in front of their computer screen all day with just looking for 10 or 15 minutes of entertainment in what's otherwise a serious day. And that grew into writing at CBS, writing at Deadspin, writing at Fan House, led to radio, and then it led to TV. And along the way, I would say what I have learned is that there are 4 things that matter in terms of what I do. I try to do, and I put it into an acronym because it's easy to remember, and I think it's useful. SOFA. I want to be smart, original, funny, and authentic every day. If you guys saw me at a bar, I want to talk to you the exact same way in the bar as I would sitting in front of my radio mic. I want to talk to you in written articles the exact same way that I would anywhere else. I want people to meet me if they want to, and they meet me and they say, Clay Travis is the exact same guy in front of and behind a microphone. He doesn't change his opinions on anything. He's going to be as honest and authentic as he can possibly be. And those have kind of been the tenets that I have followed. Now, what's fascinating about that is when I started writing on 04 online, social media was basically somebody liking your article and sharing it via email. You think about the way that you distributed content back then. In 04, there wasn't really Facebook. It was just starting, and you had to be a college student. There wasn't really Twitter. There wasn't Instagram or Snapchat or any of that stuff. You almost exclusively would spread things through an online website, and then you would maybe somebody would share an email link. And so I've had what I would call a couple of light bulb moments in my career. One happened, or 3. I'll give you 3 light bulb moments that I think are important, and social media is involved in all of them. When I went on Twitter, the first time I went on Twitter, I'm the guy who asked Tim Tebow whether or not he was saving himself for marriage, if you guys remember that. When Tebow said that he was still a virgin, I was the guy who asked him that question. And immediately I saw the ability to distribute your article and how quickly it would go through Twitter and echo chamber and reverberate everywhere. And that's when I first had the recognition, kind of a light bulb went off. The name on the back of your jersey matters more than the name on the front of your jersey, from a media perspective. It's great if you're employed by CBS, ESPN, NBC, or Fox, right? That may be validation that you're good. It doesn't actually change the number of people who consume your content. So I had that remarkable moment where I said, wait a minute, this is giving me an opportunity to distribute my content. The other thing is I started doing daily radio in Nashville. We're on 3 hours every day. And I was getting paid $45,000 to do that. And when I was making $45,000 to do that, I went in to start going on advertiser calls. And I remember I was sitting across the table from an advertiser, and I watched as that advertiser, somebody who was doing hair replacements for sports fans, like the hair edition, sign a $50,000 6-month contract. And I said, holy shit, that is more money from that one advertiser than I am making in an entire year for 6 months of one advertiser. So I had a light bulb moment there go off for me, and I said, man, what if I could eliminate the middleman? What if I could distribute my content without needing a large corporation to be involved? Third light bulb moment. A lot of you are watching right now on Periscope and also on Facebook Live. Third time it went off for me, and a lot of you are watching it, by the way, through everything that you guys are doing here with SBR 17. It's fantastic at IFBC. Third light bulb moment that went off for me was when I used Periscope for the first time, I said, holy crap. This basically is my opportunity to do a mix of a radio and a TV show live, automatically distributed to the entire audience. So if you think about distribution from TV and radio perspective, they have really high fixed costs, right? Because if you're on a radio network, they've got a huge radio antenna. They got a huge number of people that they employ. I can do this show right now on Facebook and Periscope turn it on live every day at 3 Eastern like I do, and our cost structure is virtually zero. And I get distribution directly through Twitter, everybody who follows me on Twitter, and I get distribution on Facebook. And I said, man, this empowers the individual in the world of sports in a degree that the individual has never been empowered before. So instead of requiring like old school, I always like to say, from an old school perspective, if you wanted to write an article in a newspaper, I consider myself to be a writer first and foremost. You had to get hired by that newspaper, and the newspaper was the method by which your words got out. When I started writing online in 2004, what I recognized was the internet changed everything because suddenly my opinion could get as wide a distribution as a columnist for the New York Times, right? If you did a good enough job of being entertaining, like I said, smart, original, funny, and authentic, that's my goals from the get-go. If you did a good enough job of that, there was no stopping you because the internet would be able to allow you to reach everyone. And now I've seen it with video and podcasts and everything else. I'm just incredibly optimistic on the ability of individual voices to reach audiences and create substantial opportunities for themselves going forward. And it matters even more when you see all the writers, radio people, TV people losing their jobs now. If you have the opportunity to reach everybody directly, it gives you a ton of chances going forward. Now, the other thing I would say is, from a gambling perspective, I am fascinated, put my lawyer hat on here for a moment. I think that it's always been crazy that we have the hodgepodge of gambling laws that we do in the United States, right? I think it's absurd that if you get on a plane and fly to Nevada, you can bet on any game in the United States that you want to, but if you leave the state of Nevada, you can't do it. I think it's patently ridiculous that if you want to gamble on horse racing, you can pull out your phone and download horse racing apps and bet on them many places all over the country. I've covered the Kentucky Derby. It's an awesome experience. In the Kentucky Derby media room, guys, they have their own betting window. So the media doesn't have to stand in line. Think about how crazy that is. And then you have all these other people out there like, oh, if people bet on games, it's going to change everything. I'm like, are you kidding me? The media themselves have their own betting window at the Kentucky Derby. And we have all this hodgepodge of broken laws. The hypocrisy drives me crazy sometimes. When I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and in Nashville, the NFL so far has said, the Tennessee Titans, we don't want gambling to be legal, right? But the Tennessee Titans licensed their logo to scratch off lottery tickets. All right, I want you to think about the hypocrisy of that. The NFL is anti-gambling, but they will allow their logos to be used on a scratch-off lottery ticket, which is literally the dumbest form of gambling that exists in the country. So I can't have an opinion about whether or not I think the Tennessee Titans are going to cover legally in Nashville and gamble on it, but I can roll into the gas station and buy hundreds or thousands of dollars in Titans-sponsored scratch-off fucking lottery tickets. Somebody explain to me how that makes any sense. So I practiced law for a few years, and I've been studying the gambling laws in this country for a long time. And I think, I've said this to some of the guys, I think there's about an 80% chance that in October, when the Supreme Court hears this New Jersey challenge, that they are going to overrule PASPA and that individual states are going to be able to make decisions about whether or not their citizens should be able to bet on sports games. And I just think it's going to be a tremendous change in the way our industry is covered. I think that gambling is going to become a huge part of individual game coverage. I think in the same way you've seen fantasy integrated. 25 years ago, if I told you there was going to be a ticker at the bottom of the screen during the NFL letting you know how many passing yards Eli Manning had and Odell Beckham had received, and that was going to be like individual, not even the scoreboard, just individual player stats, you would have said I was crazy. I think that when sports gambling becomes legal in this country, which I think is going to happen by the spring of next year, that's my prediction. Could be wrong. I've been wrong on a lot of stuff over the years. Trust me. Thanks, Johnny. I had a Texas A&M 2013 national title ticket. I was certainly wrong about that one. But what's wild about it is I think that it is going to, it's going to fundamentally change everything. And I think there are right now, if you want a legal analysis, at least 4 votes to overturn PASPA and allow New Jersey's law to exist. I think that they will be able to find a 5th, and this could end up like a 7-2 or 8-1 decision. Because the fascinating thing about sports gambling is it's not really a Republican or Democrat issue, right? Most people who look out there and analyze this situation look at it from the perspective of should this or should this not be the opportunity of individual states and citizens to decide whether or not it exists. Guys, right now there are 44 states that allow wagering for purposes of the lottery. right? The only 6 states that don't allow it in the country right now: Alaska, Hawaii, Utah, Mississippi, Alabama, and Nevada, all right? 2 of those are huge casino states, Mississippi and Nevada. So the reason they don't have it is because they don't want the competition. Utah, because of the Mormon faith's incredibly religious. Alabama, because people in Alabama are fucking crazy and they do all sorts of stuff. Amen. And then I don't know what's happened in Alaska and Hawaii that it doesn't exist. But I think there was a great analogy made yesterday where if you just had to think about the morality, all right? Think about this. What would you feel more comfortable walking into your office and talking about at the water cooler on Monday after an awesome weekend? Would you talk about the fact that you got blackout drunk in your office on Monday? Probably not. Perfectly legal. Would you talk about the fact that you smoked weed in many of the states out there where it is perfectly legal now? Probably not. Would you talk about the fact that you went to a strip club and you dropped $1,000 on lap dances? Probably not. Would you feel comfortable saying, hey, guess what? I went and made a bunch of bets while I was in Vegas this weekend. Let's talk about whether you think I made good bets or not. Everybody would talk about number 4. In fact, number 4 might end up getting you promoted because everybody wants to talk about gambling, right? The bets that they placed, it's not socially awkward at all. The other 3 things I just named, whether you want to talk about drinking heavily, smoking pot, or going to strip clubs, those are all legal. But nobody would walk into their business on Monday and feel comfortable, certainly talking about it with men and women present, around a water cooler. And not one person in America would feel uncomfortable about it. And by the way, you know what's also illegal under federal law if you wanted to push it aggressively? Filling out an NCAA tournament bracket. That's illegal. Technically, you could be prosecuted for that. Every single person in America who cares about sports as scintilla, and many who don't care at all, fill out NCAA tournament brackets and talk about them at work. And probably your employer has his own pool or her pool that you're paying into. That's illegal. But it's a broken system that we have created around sports gambling. And so I think reasonable minds from both the left and the right, Democrats, Republicans, the 9 justices on the Supreme Court, I think they're going to review this and say, this is an unconstitutional law that was passed and passed by. And this is not a ridiculous proposition. When this law was passed in 1992, showing you that politics can sometimes create strange bedfellows, the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee was Joe Biden. Joe Biden, who would later become vice president for Barack Obama. He said that he did not believe that a federal prohibition on sports gambling was legal. Democrat. The first George Bush, the guy who showed up to watch Johnny Manziel's pro day, the first George Bush, his Department of Justice also said that they believed that this law violated the 10th Amendment federalism powers that are given to the states. So even when this law was being signed in 1992, you had prominent Democrats and prominent Republicans saying, wait a minute, this law to me does not pass constitutional muster. And so I believe that not only is this law going to be invalidated, I think that it could happen in a dominating fashion, a 7-2, 8-1, 6-3 type decision, not just a narrow decision. And if that happens, it's going to be a sea change overnight. Because then what I think needs to happen is we need federal legislation to set parameters for sports gambling, personally, right? And individual states can opt in or out depending on whether or not they agree with it. What I think is more likely to happen is that we end up with 50 different states making determination about whether or not sports gambling should be legal in their jurisdictions. And the problem with politicians getting involved is politicians are inevitably like 20 or 25 years behind where their constituents are. Because I don't know about you guys, but every person that I know who's under the age of 40 that loves sports, I don't know anybody who feels bad about pulling out their phone and making a wager during a game or before a game. They want to make it as easy as possible. I think some of these states are going to make sports wagering more difficult than they need to, but I just think if you're not preparing for the eventuality of legalized sports gambling in many different states and jurisdictions in this country, you are missing what will be the biggest change to sports since the Supreme Court made the decision that allowed free agency effectively, the Curt Flood case, and also the 1983 Supreme Court case where they said the NCAA, who I think is the biggest sham asshole of an organization in sports today. Yeah, thank you. I think they're just a total fraud. And let me tell you my NCAA argument here for a moment. Anytime I have a big audience, I want people to hear this because I think it matters. Johnny was just talking about when he got investigated by the NCAA. I can't think of a more anti-capitalistic organization in America than the NCAA because the NCAA's essential purpose is to make sure that poor kids remain poor. We talk a lot about morality and sports, right? It's a big topic of discussion. Guys, can you imagine, take it outside of sports, if you were a young kid in college and you were on a chemistry scholarship and you had no money, right? You had no money outside of that chemistry scholarship. And one of your chemistry professors knew that. And he allowed you to come over to his house, right? And on the weekend, you cut his grass, you chopped wood, you took care of his lawn and his yard. And he gave you a couple $100 every weekend. That guy would be such a friend to you that you might be willing to name your firstborn son or daughter after him, right? I mean, seriously, that's how much difference that would make, just to give you a little bit of walking around money. If that same thing happens to a football player, it's an NCAA violation. The fact that the NCAA has created the phrase improper benefit is, to me, the biggest bullshit in the history of sports. And improper benefit is what everybody else in America and everywhere else in the world who believes in capitalism calls pay for labor. Like everybody's goal is to sell their labor, ideally, for as much money as you possibly can, right? We don't make Taylor Swift go sing in the Vanderbilt chorus before she releases an album. Jennifer Lawrence doesn't have to go to Louisville and star in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof instead of making the Hunger Games. At 18 years old, when you're an adult, if you can make a living at something, you should be able to make a living at it. And get the fuck out of here with the idea that signing your autograph for money means that you can't play football or basketball in college. I just think it's a moral issue, and I think more intelligent people need to be holding the NCAA's feet to the fire and saying, what are we afraid of? I mean, an honest question. First of all, improper benefit is a phrase that shouldn't exist. But what are we afraid of? So what if somebody who's talented at college football or basketball gets to drive a Range Rover? Like, why does that matter to you? People who are talented at pro sports get to drive a Range Rover. People who are in college right now and have rich parents get to drive one, or stay in a nice condo while they're in college, or stay in a much nicer apartment than they otherwise would. It's not an improper benefit to have a rich parent. It is an improper benefit to be poor. The NCAA, those bastards, are in the business of making sure that poor kids, when they enter college, remain poor when they leave. Again, we talk a lot about immorality and morality in sports. To me, that's the single most immoral thing that we allow to exist in sports. So that's me on my soapbox. Drives me crazy. I'll take any of your questions now. Zach, how are we doing on time? Where's Zach? We're good? We're good. All right, fire away. Any questions you guys want about anything? Yeah, back in the back.
Clay, we spoke about it earlier. We know when the U.S. government wants to get involved in anything, they're going to want to be paid for it. And how do you think they're going to be paid for it, knowing there's not a lot of room in the -110 model of sports betting for anybody else to really make money? So how is the U.S. government going to get paid?
So it's a good question. How would the U.S. government get involved? How would state governments get involved in sports gambling? If tomorrow somebody came to me and they said, hey, Clay Travis, we want you to be in charge of federal and state sports gambling legislation, what would you suggest? I would suggest this. I would say that what we're rapidly moving toward is an era where you should be able to place bets against other individuals online to create an entirely symbiotic relationship, right? So if I think Alabama is going to cover -6 or whatever the line is against Florida State, I should be able to go online almost in a stock market-like situation, find somebody who wants to take FSU +6, have an entity able to withdraw money from my account and the other guy's account and distribute that money. To me, the way to do that, which would allow substantial dollars to be brought in, would be to potentially sell a gambling license so that guys and girls out there could get better rates instead of it needing to be -110 or whatever else it is. Maybe it's like a credit card transaction, and that company takes a 2 or 3% fee to set up that transaction. So sports gambling, I think, would explode because you'd be able to win more frequently. You'd be able to keep more of your winnings, and you'd have somewhat of an efficient market, right? Almost like the stock market. Somebody wants to sell. I also think that would work, and I think we need this for futures bets. I'll give you an example. A lot of people had Lamar Jackson 66-1 before the college football season started to win the Heisman Trophy. Well, if Lamar Jackson drops to 3-1 and you start to get nervous, maybe he's not going to win, you should be able to lock in the value that you've created from getting a 66-1 ticket all the way down to 3-1. Now, I know that exists a little bit in Vegas, but to me, that should happen online. What I'm afraid is going to happen is every individual state's going to make a decision, and they're going to be like, okay, you have to go to a physical location, right, to place a bet. Either they're not going to allow it, or they're going to say you have to go out to a physical location. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I was at Cantor when they first debuted the live game wagering for the NCAA tournament back in 2010 or 9 or whatever year it was, and I'm sitting there in Lagash Sportsbook in Palazzo betting on whether free throws are going to be made or not, and I'm like, this is the fucking future, right? The number of guys and girls out there who would sit with those apps open on their phones. So I think what the states are in danger of is being so far where the technology is that even if they legalize it, who's going to get in their car and drive? I think that sports gambling online needs to be as easy as Amazon, right? I can go on anywhere and buy basically anything through Amazon now. I think that sports gambling is going to go through the phones. And so I hope that the states aren't completely out to lunch on trying to trying to create their own policies and what should and shouldn't be allowed. Questions? Yeah, right here. If you want to wait for the mic.
This is less than a question than more of a statement of what you're talking about, the credit cards. This is what I do for a living. The big thing that's going to happen is if that does happen where it's state to state, right now it's happening in marijuana, you can't do a credit card transaction from one state if the bank's in a different state that doesn't do it. It's a federal law. Okay. So something to think about for everyone.
Not only that, but I mean, to me, what's going to be crazy, and I think most guys, especially guys, mostly guys, right, under the age of 40, think it's insane that they can't pull out their phone and place a wager on a sports bet. I mean, that is just basically insane. And so I think if the states don't catch up with the technology, it's also going to be a total mess because let's say a lot of people out here may go to games in the NFL or college football. If you are, let's say I live in Nashville, right? Let's say I want to go watch Tennessee play Alabama and get beat by 50 points for the 50th straight year. All right, so if I do that, if I travel to Alabama but I forget, let's say, to place my wager while I'm inside the state borders, it's going to be crazy to anybody who uses the internet that when they're on one side of the state border in Tennessee, sports gambling is legal, and as soon as I go to Alabama to go to that game and then find out, let's say the quarterback's not going to play on one team or the other and the line adjusts, that I'm not legally able to go in and adjust my bet, which is why I think we need federal legislation, and I think the leagues would support that as well. And frankly, the federal legislation needs to understand and accept that most wagering is going to happen on phones. And my thing is, I think that's actually a lot better for people because right now, if you get in the whole 10 grand, let's say, your bookie might keep giving you more and more money to hang yourself, right? The good thing about, I think, sports books, as this got more regulated, is you'd only be able to wager money that you could lose, right? At some point, you're going to have to deal with the fact that you might not have any more money. And I think that's healthier, instead of a bookie showing up and allowing you to get so far in the hock that you can never get out of it. So yeah, to me, it needs to be federal, and it needs to be based on allowing people with their phones to bet just as easily as you can go in to me and buy something on Amazon. It needs to happen everywhere. Now, if individual states want to tax it differently, that's fine. If like Tennessee, where I live, wants to make a 10% tax on it, and then California wants to do a 4%, like depending on how many people sign up, or they want to implement it in different ways, I think that makes total sense.
I have a question.
Yeah, where are we going? Yes.
Okay, so for me, my point of view is that credit card processing is going to become archaic because of cryptocurrency.
Oh, God.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so I mean, the cryptocurrency makes it basically completely untrackable who's gambling.
Right.
And that's why I think that the technology is moving so rapidly that we could easily create these web pages where everybody is coming on and doing these peer-to-peer betting. Right. And then how in the world do you know who those people are? How do you track them down when they're using cryptocurrencies to place wagers? The problem with politicians, and this happens with the Supreme Court too, is that they are so far behind the technology that currently exist when they try to implement the laws, right? And that's why so many things that are fascinating to me about the Supreme Court are not Republican or Democrat. It's figuring out how do we manage the advancement of technology at such a rapid pace and keep the law up to roughly where people are, right? Because if you come out, if the individual states come out and they say, okay, we're now going to allow sports gambling, but you have to drive to a physical location and go in and place it at a window like they do in London and lots of other places, you're going to have to also allow online, because otherwise the offshore sports books are providing a better service that's easier for people to use. And again, I just don't think, again, I use that example of you're going to get blackout drunk, smoke weed, go to a strip club and drop $1,000, or go gamble. By far, people would talk about going to gamble and not feel bad about it at all. So the morality angle here, in terms of people thinking it's a sin or there's something wrong with it, it may not be the case for a 65-year-old. There ain't a 25-year-old in America today who thinks it's wrong to bet on sports. I mean, seriously, I just don't think there is one. And the younger you go, the more ridiculous it is that they think it's prohibited, because their lifestyle is already so far beyond that. I appreciate everybody. Thank you for SPR 17. Appreciate you guys on Facebook and Twitter hanging out with us. Thanks to Johnny Manziel. Good luck to him as he pursues his NFL career. Lots of fun as always. Appreciate y'all.